Emilia is currently the Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at the Ruskin School of Drawing and Fine Art at Oxford University. She has a book forthcoming next year with IB Tauris titled Art and Emergency in 20th Century India, which evolves out for her PhD from the Courtauld, a collaborative doctoral award with the V&A Museum. You may have seen her recent review of Imran Qureshi's exhibition at the Barbican in Modern Painters, or do look out for her forthcoming review of Tate Modern's Bupakaka show in the Burlington magazine. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the wonderful Sarah for inviting me, and also Hamad, Devika, and Sonal for asking me to present what will be some thoughts on the Mohammadi phenomenon. So it's not really an academic paper, but I will be sort of looking into a set of issues which I hardly ever manage to sort of put forth in the mainstream magazine articles that I occasionally write about. So I'm an art historian by training who often kind of writes reviews about artists who also work in South Asia, but not exclusively. So I'll start with a quote by a recently published article by art historian Benjamin Buchlow on the work of Prabhavati Mepail, which you see here. So he asks, can the recitation of apparently obsolete strategies in a fundamentally different geopolitical location and context generate renewed signification and significance for our reflection on late modernist art practices in the so-called Western context, especially at a moment when Western visual culture seems to have turned its back on any and all aspects of the initially transformative implications of these late modernist practices, end quote. This was an essay published in 2014. Buchlow begins his essay, Prabhavati Mepail, Redeeming Abstraction Under Duress. And the essay is largely devoted to assessing Mepail's abstraction in relation to 20th century post-war reductivist practices, particularly vis-a-vis the grid, the monochrome, the achrome, paradigms which in Buchlow's view have been universally discarded by most European American artists. So my intention today in these brief 10 minutes is not really to revisit this particular essay, but to suggest that there has been a renewed interest on the part of European and American institutions in the work of female Indian artists whose work can be described as largely non-figurative. Sheila Gowda, for example, this is at Tate Modern, Mrinalini Mukherjee's arboreal enactment at the Gwangju Biennale, and of course, Nazreen Mohammadi. So I have written about the work of Mohammadi already, but what interests me here today is how the Mohammadi phenomenon has perhaps obscured the more problematic legacies of her abstraction. So just to kind of sum up, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the work of Mohammadi, but just to tell you a bit about her for those who have not seen her work. Mohammadi was little known outside her home country until after her death, and her work comprises predominantly modest-sized drawings in pen and pencil on paper. So they move progressively from grid structures in delicate pencil traces, which have invited comparisons with American artist Agnes Martin's own expansive use of the line, but also to the more meticulous, hard-edged forms common to Russian constructivism, for example, and particularly Kazimir Malevich architectonic suprematism. So perhaps on the one hand, Mohammadi's international success, a success which I'm keen to emphasize is posthumous, is linked to the apparent similarity that her drawings share with an existing European canon. However, this analogy has also been prompted very much by the artist's own personal references and repeated references to Paul Klee and Vasily Kandinsky, amongst others. One of the significant challenges posed to art historians and curators by Mohammadi's artistic output is that her work is deliberately unsigned, undated, and untitled. And it still remains unclear what happened after her death to her studio and meticulously archived diaries and works. These are just a couple of slides from her own diaries. Unverifiable information suggests that much of her output went missing and has made its way into private collections across the world, particularly Japan, India, and the US. The posthumous rehabilitation of Mohammadi's work and its appearance on the International Biennale art circuit sheds light on shifting political equations determined as much by emergent or declining political movements as they are by the dictates of the state and the market. Mohammadi, observed Geeta Kapoor in an essay of 2009, was a cosmopolitan person and artist, but internationally unknown for the simple reason that the globalization of Indian art only began in the 1990s. Geeta Kapoor has repeatedly queried the very idea of universality underpinning art history, and keen to arrive at a more complex understanding of the universal in art, she has rejected hegemonic meta-narratives of individual sovereignties, which always ultimately reinforce its European source. The site of the international exhibition is one of displacement, she suggests. The work is torn from its cultural context, meaning from its political moorings. Moreover, Kapoor observes that current curatorial strategies, or rather in 2009, she observed that current curatorial strategies capitalize on chance discoveries based more than ever on local difference. So the act of making and viewing exhibitions furthermore produces cognitive tropes which invariably recode that very difference. So since 2005, Mohammadi's work has received international exposure at the Drawing Center in New York, at Oka in Norway in 2009, an exhibition which traveled extensively across Europe, including Milton Keynes, at the Asia Pacific Art Triennale in 2007, LA. This was an exhibition entitled WAC, which included the work of feminist artists. And then, of course, Documenta in 2007 in Kassel. Back then, the inclusion of Mohammadi's work reflected the aim of director Roger Burgle and curator Ruth Nowak to showcase artifacts from outside Western art historical narratives, with particularly strong representations from South America, Eastern Europe, and India. So I think curatorially we've really come a long way from the kind of crude juxtaposition that we witnessed at Documenta, where Mohammadi was kind of sandwiched in between a work of Agnes Martin and a company painting of 1820. So more recently, Mohammadi's work was shown at Tate Liverpool in 2014 at this exhibition entitled Mondrian and His Studios and Nasri Mohammadi. And later, of course, the beautiful exhibition curated at Kiran Nada, View to Infinity, Nasri Mohammadi, a retrospective, which really culminated in this beautiful, again, very beautiful and sophisticated curatorial effort on the part of the Reina Sofia in Madrid. Again, that was 2015. And then, of course, the Met Museum in 2016. Mohammadi, I would argue, is now a multi-million phenomenon. The Ambanis sponsored this particular show, a latest reincarnation of Mohammadi's. And what is common, I believe, amongst these endeavors is to produce, and I'd like to, see what you think about this, a kind of unique, sort of mythologized, perhaps even exceptional artist whose career has largely developed in isolation from that of her peers. So how then do we make sense of Mohammadi's position? Many have cited Islamic influences such as Sufism, her travels to Iran and Turkey, Bahrain, Kuwait. From another perspective, however, there is an emphasis on secular modernist projects reflecting the concerns in post-independence India, and this, I argue, would be especially true of Indian Muslims during this period, who are routinely blamed for partition and subsequently targeted in conflicts with Pakistan. And I think it's interesting in the light of contemporary anxieties over fundamentalist Islam, it is interesting to note that Mohammadi's work has recently been described as a form of moderate modernism, echoing perhaps the current political anxieties and language used by the US government towards its Muslim citizens, but I guess I would, argue similar things in the context of Europe. So Mohammadi's own shift between the delicate play of line, as in these two works, and the later more diagrammatic structures intimate a dialogue between her inner solitary absorption, creating these intricate labyrinths, and their way they point to an anonymous collective creative potential reminiscent of deep absorption and routine mechanization. So the value of repetition in relation to Mohammadi's drawings denotes a conceptual critical elimination of spontaneity with intuition as a false basis of art. On the other hand, however, it can create in its insistence on a routine that demands accuracy and command of the hand, a numbing of the active mind, inducing a state of reflective meditation. This movement backwards and forwards between the metaphysical and the concrete structures that claim a materialist base brings us to a central paradox in our understanding of abstraction and its legacies. I think there's much more to be said on this matter, but the value of this parallel analysis that is based on process more than anything else lies partly in an attempt to rethink Mohammadi's work within a broader parameter that acknowledges a shared artistic heritage and refuses nationalist frameworks that are readily attributed to Indian and Pakistani art. Crucial to this exercise would be an understanding of how this shared heritage came together with Bauhaus, but also in London and NID and Baroda. This exercise may allow us once again to deprovincialize our parochial understanding of abstraction, an understanding that would allow us to reassess the radically transformative and cosmopolitan impulse underpinning Mohammadi's non-figurative art practice. Thank you.